Hi crew, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to become a digital nomad. Have you ever thought about it? Have you ever thought about what it would be like to travel from place to place, collecting stamps in your passport, seeing really cool things and meeting amazing people all over the world, all while continuing to work and bring in income? If that sounds good to you, then you might be interested in becoming a digital nomad. And in today's video, what we're going to be walking through is a step-by-step process for how you can go from wherever you are, maybe stuck in a job that you don't really love, in a location that you're just not huge on, to becoming a location-independent digital nomad that will allow you to make money and travel the world. And to break this down as simply as possible, I've broken this down into just 2 steps. Yes, I really believe there are just 2 steps that everybody needs to go through to become a digital nomad. And stay tuned to the end of this video, because within those steps there are some options, and I will give you the options that I would select if I was going to become a digital nomad all over again. Okay, so let's get into it. Step 1 in becoming a digital nomad is determining what kind of digital nomad you want to be. And this isn't something I ever hear people talk about, but it is definitely the most important step of these 2 steps. If you figure out this step, you will probably on your own figure out step 2. But if you don't ask this question, you're very likely going to have trouble navigating how to become a digital nomad, because you're just not going to understand what your parameters are for doing so. So the first step in becoming a digital nomad is asking the question, what kind of digital nomad do you want to be? And based off of my experience, there's just a few questions that you can ask yourself to determine what kind of digital nomad you want to be. And those questions are, first, where do you want to travel? Do you want to travel outside the US? Do you want to travel in Thailand, Central America, South America, Europe? Or do you want to travel inside the US or your home country? And the reason this is a really important question to ask is it narrows the type of opportunities that you can use to make income. For example, if you are an employee, a lot of companies, in particular companies that are heavily regulated like the financial industry or the medical technology industry, you can only work inside a country that the company has a corporation in. And so if you want to travel outside of your home country and you're looking for a remote job in your home country, and it's in a heavily regulated industry, you're really going to want to think about whether or not that's the best fit for the kind of digital nomad you want to be. Equally, if you have clients in your home country and your clients are on your home country's time zone, you are really going to want to think about what your life is going to be like if you go to the other side of the world in a completely different time zone and you still have to work with them. And the last reason it's really important to ask where you want to travel when you're planning to become a digital nomad and asking this question, what kind of digital nomad do I want to be, is different countries cost different amounts to live in. If you go to Thailand, for example, living there for 2 months is going to be a lot cheaper than if you're living in the US for 2 months. And you need to understand that piece of it first, because a lot of being a digital nomad is about financial planning and figuring out a way to get your location independent income to meet your expectations for being a digital nomad. The second thing that you want to ask when you're determining what kind of digital nomad you want to be is how you want to travel. Do you want an Airbnb entirely to yourself so you can easily take meetings and talk with clients and you have no one interrupting you during the day? Or are you totally cool with being in a hostel and going from place to place, staying in dormitories of people? And the reason this is important to ask is, again, back to the money piece of this, which goes, it's a lot more expensive to stay in an Airbnb by yourself than in a dormitory at a hostel with a bunch of people. And it's really important to understand how much you're going to be spending when you are off traveling as a digital nomad. In the same line of making sure that you understand your financial situation is, do you want to travel by yourself or with someone else? If you are traveling by yourself, it is going to cost you a lot more to do pretty much everything than if you're traveling with someone else. If you're traveling with one other person, it becomes a lot easier to split Airbnbs, for example. But if you're just traveling by yourself and you're taking all that cost on your own, it's going to be a lot more expensive. So again, something you want to consider when you're just starting on this journey to figure out how to become a digital nomad. And then the last question that you want to ask is timing. When do you actually want this to happen? Do you want this to happen in 6 months? Do you want this to happen in 1 year? Do you want this to happen in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? What is it? You need to get really clear on this. And the reason is there are multiple ways that you can achieve location-independent income. However, some options for acquiring location-independent income take longer than others. And some of the ones that take the longest are actually the best, but if you want to do this in 6 months, then you might have to look at a different option. So you want to understand really early on how soon you want this to happen. And that will help you narrow in how you actually become a digital nomad. And as far as those options go, that's what we're going to be talking about in step 2, which is selecting your option for location-independent income and achieving location independence. When it comes to selecting an option for how you achieve location independence, there are really 3 options. The first is being a freelancer. And what it means to really be a freelancer is you are providing a service that someone is paying you for. And you can do this using websites like Upwork, wherein you are connected with a client and they pay you through that platform, or you can find clients on your own. But the basic idea is the same. Someone asks you for help with a service, you provide the service, and they pay you for it, and you do the work yourself. The second is what I would call a business. Now, I know being a freelancer is technically a business, but in this case, I'm using the business to describe a word where you build out systems wherein you don't necessarily have to be involved with the business to keep it operational. So in this second option, maybe you start an e-commerce store, which is selling hats or anchor bracelets, or maybe you are running almost more of an agency. So instead of you doing all of the work for clients, you have people who work for you and they do the work for clients and then pass it back to them and you collect some of the income. And the third way, and by far and away now the most common way to achieve location independent income, is to work a remote job. And I'm not talking about a hybrid where you have to go in a couple times a week. I'm talking about fully remote. So where you do not need to go into the office at all and you can work from pretty much anywhere or almost anywhere depending on your company. Again, this is why it's important to go back to step 1 and understand what kind of digital nomad you want to be, because if you want to travel outside the US and you're working in a heavily regulated industry, you might not be able to do that. So now let's take a look at each of these options and figure out what would work the best for you. The first option was being a freelancer. And there's a lot of people who do this. There's a lot of people who have clients and they do the work and they get paid. And it's a good model. But who is this really the best for? It's really the best for people who don't want to answer to anyone. You don't want to have to pick up the phone or be randomly called by your boss. People who just want generally more independence during their day. And there's a lot of benefits to having that independence. For example, if you're working a remote job, you generally need to be available most hours of the day, maybe except around lunch. But if you're a freelancer, you can pretty much make your own schedule and do what you want when. Another benefit to being a freelancer is you really don't deal with those same restrictions that you deal with at least being an employee for a company. Meaning you can pretty much go anywhere. You're not going to deal with many regulatory issues. At least you won't be dealing with that from a big brother manager, boss, or corporation. Now, what are the downsides to being a freelancer? Well, one is your income is not guaranteed and it can go way up and down. I had months when I was a freelancer where I was making $8,000 and months where I was making $1. It really varies up and down. And if you're the kind of person that can deal with the ambiguous nature of that, then you'll do really well in it. If you're someone who likes a little bit more security, someone who likes a solid paycheck that you know is gonna come every 2 weeks or once a month, then being a freelancer probably isn't your best option. Now let's take a look at running a business. And again, I've separated out being a freelancer from running a business just because I wanna make it clear that basically there's 2 different options to run a business, where you do all the work or you manage the work. And in what I'm calling a business, you're managing the work. You're not doing all the work yourself. Now, of these 3 options, being a freelancer, running your own business, and being an employee, running your own business takes the most amount of time. It takes the most amount of time to set up and really get going. It also takes the highest risk tolerance. Whenever you're starting your own business, you're going to have to invest time and capital, and you're not going to be sure it's going to work. You're also not going to be sure, just like with being a freelancer, you're going to get consistent income over time. However, if you can make this work, if you can really start a business and manage the work instead of doing all of the work yourself, much like the freelancer, you have complete control over your schedule and you have even more control over your time. As a freelancer, very often you have to bill hours, but when you're running a business, you can either bill someone else's hours or have a business model which is not based around hours at all. And because of that, you have the maximum amount of freedom. Now, this type of thing does take the longest to set up out of our 3 options that we've discussed. Being a freelancer, you can generally start to find clients pretty quickly. Having a remote job, once you have the job, you pretty much have the job. And I think that most people can find a new position in about 3 to 6 months. A business is just going to take a lot more time than that. And if you're okay with a longer time horizon, and you're also okay with things being a little bit ambiguous and being able to take on some risk, starting a business can be a really good option for you. And you could look at multiple things. You could look at Amazon FBA, you could look at e-commerce, you could look at running an agency. The sky is really the limit with the kind of business that you can start. And now for our third option, which is being a remote employee. And I am actually a remote employee. I work for a company based on the East Coast of the United States, and I like it. It's a great company. I've had a really great time there. I work with really great people. What are some of the benefits to being a remote employee over maybe freelancing or running your own business? One, and I know this sounds like kind of funny, but it is a huge benefit that I never hear people talking about when being an employee. You can walk away at any time. If you decide that you don't like the culture, if you decide you don't like the work that you're doing as an employee, you can just leave. Like, you can put in your 2 weeks notice, or you can even say, I'm out, if you wanted to. It's not good practice to do that, but you could. If you're running your own business or you're a freelancer, you can't do that. You can't just tell clients, I'm out. Or if you do tell clients you're out as a freelancer, you're not going to be working with many more clients, and that's going to heavily affect your income. Very similarly with a business, if you're running a whole business, an operation, you're managing multiple people to produce a product or a service, you can't just say you're out, because if you say you're out, now you're not only impacting your clients, but you're impacting the people that work for you. And that is something that you need to consider. So the biggest benefit to being a remote employee is you really don't have to deal with any of that. And you can walk away at any time, and you can pivot from being an employee to a freelancer and to a business owner. In that regard, it gives you the most options. The other benefit to being an employee is it is the quickest to get going. As a freelancer, it's going to take time to build up clients. If you're starting your own business, it's going to take a while to build up your business systems. If you want to get a remote job, all you have to do is get a remote job. And it might sound easy to say that, but actually, since the pandemic, there's a lot of jobs that are remote. And how do you find these jobs? Well, prior to 2020, you had to go to special websites that were hiring for remote employees. But now they're on LinkedIn, and you can actually select a box that says remote. And what's even better than that is the salaries are really good. Again, prior to 2020, being a remote employee was like a benefit, and so they paid you less. But now in 2023, you can get a very high paying job well into the 6 figures and still be remote. And that is a huge advantage. You can get a 6-figure job that's remote, that you can walk away from at any time, and that still allows you to travel. I think of these options in many ways. Being an employee gives you the maximum amount of freedom. Now, what are some of the downsides to being an employee? One, you have to be near your computer. When you're taking a lot of calls, you can't just be off in a cafe by the ocean. And the other downside to being an employee is what I've mentioned several times in this video. You have to get really clear when you're applying for a job at a company where you can work. I can only work in the United States. I can travel anywhere I want in the United States, and I don't really even have to tell anyone unless I'm in one location for like 3 or 4 months, and then I'm supposed to send an email, and it's no big deal. But if I wanted to travel outside the US, it would be a much bigger deal. There's still technically a way I can do it, but it is a whole process, and it's just not something that I particularly want to go through. I'd rather just take off time and go to Thailand. And the last thing to be aware of when being a remote employee is the time zone that your company is based out of. Some companies will work asynchronously. So if people are working on the East Coast of the United States and Europe, they'll let them work at different times. My company, we all work East Coast hours. So whether you're on the East Coast of the United States or the West Coast or wherever you are, you have to work East Coast hours. And that's so everybody can be available to take calls. And I actually think from a company perspective, it's pretty smart in that way because communication is very good. But as far as freedom goes, that is very limiting if you want to travel in a completely different time zone. So all around, you're going to have more freedom as an employee with your options. You're probably going to make more money. I would go as far to say that because the remote jobs have gotten to be very well paying unless you want to spend a long time building up a business. But overall, during your day-to-day work, you're going to have less freedom in the places that you can travel and also your schedule overall. Now, out of all these options of being a freelancer, of starting a business, of being a remote employee, which one would I choose? And the answer is kind of tricky, because I would choose 2. And the options I would choose: to become a remote employee so that you can, get your life going. I really don't believe in this whole wait for 5 years for my life to happen. I think it's important that if you really want to do something, to figure out how to do it as soon as possible so you can figure out if you like it. You might become a remote employee, or you might become a digital nomad and realize it's just not for you. But the good thing about that is you figure that out and you can move on to the next thing. If you never take that step, or you put it off for years and years and years, you might end up putting something off for years and years and years, or working towards it only to realize you never liked it to begin with. So I'm a big fan of do what you think you want to do as soon as possible so you can figure out if you like it, because the only way to figure out if you like something is to actually do it. Now, I would become a remote employee, and I would be totally cool where I am right now in the US, because there's a lot of really cool things to do in the US. I don't think I'll be getting bored. But then on the side, over a 2 to 3 year period, I would be building up my own business. And I would be building up my business not necessarily because I want to leave my company. I actually really like the company I work for, but because I'd like to have the option. And I think it'd be cool to run my own business. And by the way, that's exactly what I'm doing. So hopefully this video gave you a few ideas for how to become a digital nomad that you can start implementing on today, and you can achieve your location independent income and see some of the things that you really want to see in your life while still building your career. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, like and subscribe. We'd love to have you, and see you next time.